Okay, now we're going to use what we've been talking about in all of Chapter 5, factoring, to help us solve equations, right? College algebra is really about solving all different kinds of equations. And so what's important is for us to start recognizing what kind of an equation something is. Because depending on the kind of equation it is, depends on the method we use. So far, we've only had linear equations. So here's a very simple linear equation. Linear means, and by the way, to determine what kind of equation it is, we always look at what's being done to the variable. So here we just got an x, a plain x. A linear equation means your exponent's a 1. If that's the case, remember our steps and our goal was just to get all the x's on one side and numbers on the other. So in the end, you had an equation that said x equals a number. Okay, now we had various steps to accomplish that in the middle, but our goal was to get the x's on one side, numbers on the other. If I have a quadratic equation, okay, which looks like this, what makes it quadratic is that now you have the biggest exponent of 2. Okay, linear, your biggest exponent is 1. Quadratic, your biggest exponent is 2. Here's some examples of quadratic equations. Now look at this one. The number's on the other side, but these are not like terms. I cannot get my x's all together by themselves, so I need a different method. Okay, that's where factoring is going to come in. So if we have a quadratic equation, the method for linear equations does not work. Instead, I want to think about something called the zero product property. If you have two things multiplied together that equals 0, the only way that can happen is if one of them is 0. Okay, it only happens with 0. If I have two things multiplied together that equals 3, it doesn't mean one of those numbers is 3. It might be a -1 times -3. It might be 6 times 1/2, right? The only time I can be assured of that is if it equals 0. So our first step when we're solving quadratic equations, we have to set it equal to 0. And then we're going to try to factor that quadratic expression on the left-hand side. And remember, when we factor, we wind up with two things multiplied together. So if I have two things multiplied together that equals 0, the only way that can happen is if one of them 0. This one's 0 or that one's 0. Okay, so that's our goal here. Let's try that. Okay, look right here at the beginning. They're real nice for us, and they've got the factoring done. Anytime you have two things being multiplied together that equals 0, the only way that can happen is if one of them is 0. That means either 2x plus 3 equals 0 or 5x plus 7 equals 0. At least one of them has to be 0. Hey, but look, that just gives us linear equations, and not only that, pretty simple linear equations. So now I do my steps to solve my linear equation until I get x all by itself. But I've got to solve both of them, right? Don't forget, I've got 2 here to solve. And I'm assuming now we know our steps for solving a linear equation, so we can just walk through that. All right, so either x is -3/2 or x is -7/5. Either one of those answers will make this 0, right? If I plug in -1.5 here, 2 times -1.5 is -3 plus, that's 0. 0 times, it doesn't matter what that is, 0 times this is 0. If you plug in -7/5 here, that's 0. So they both work. Okay, so you can always check your answer by plugging it back in to your original equation. Notice we got two answers this time. Okay? Anytime, now this one we can't see because it's not multiplied out, but this is a quadratic. If I were to multiply this out, I'm going to get 10x squared. Anytime my biggest exponent's a 2, I'm going to get two answers. So far, we've only been getting one answer, but our biggest exponent was a 1. When we get to equations where our biggest exponent's a 3, we're going to get 3 answers. If our biggest exponent's a 5, we're going to get 5 answers. Okay. Okay. They already got the factoring done for us again. Now, don't let them trick you. Just because they have the factoring done, make sure it equals 0 first. But aha, it does. So the only way that can happen is if this factor or that factor equals 0. One of them, at least, has to equal 0. Well, that one's already solved for x. And then solve this one. So x equals -2 or x equals 0. Two answers again. Okay. They've quit being nice to us, right? So we got to do our own factoring. But don't forget, before we do that, we've got to make it set equal to 0. It has to be equal to 0 if we have a quadratic equation. So let's subtract 8 from both sides so that it will equal 0. So x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0. This is a quadratic with a leading coefficient of 1, so I know if I can find those two numbers, it's going to factor like that. Two numbers that multiply to give -8 and add to give +2. So what's that? +4 and -2. We got to be good at factoring, remember? Now, once I have two things multiplied together that equal 0, one of them is 0. So either x plus 4 is 0 or x minus 2 is 0. Okay, solving each of these equations, we find out that x is -4 or x is 2. My two answers that I better have gotten. Okay, same thing. I see it's quadratic. I have to set it equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract x and subtract 30 from both sides. Right? Subtract x from both sides so that that's gone, and subtract 30 from both sides. Again, leading coefficient is 1, so if it factors, I know it's like this. And I just need to find two numbers that multiply to give -30, add to give -1. -6 and +5. Gotta be good at factoring. So what does that mean now? That's right. Either x minus 6 is 0 or x plus 5 is 0. So if I add 6 to both sides, or if I subtract 5 from both sides, I know, I'm trying to ease us into, maybe not having to write every single step. If you still need to, that's fine. I'm going to go back and forth, ease us into it. Okay, what do I have to do first? Make sure it's equal to 0. So that means I'd have to make that 0 by subtracting 30, but whatever I do to one side, I have to do the same thing to the other side. Now, because it's quadratic, I'm going to try to factor this. What's the first thing I do when I'm trying to factor this equation? I hope you said do not forget about the greatest common factor. So let's take out a 3 first. And that leaves m squared minus 3m minus 10 now equals 0. Okay, so now this has a leading coefficient of 1, so it should be easy to factor. If it's not prime, there will be two numbers that multiply to give negative 10 and add to give negative 3. Those two numbers should be negative 5 and positive 2. Okay, now I have three things multiplied together that equal 0. It doesn't matter, as long as everything's multiplied together and they equal 0, one of them's got to be 0. So either 3 is 0, or m minus 5 is 0, or m plus 2 is 0. Okay, 3 is not 0. All that means is this is not the one that's 0, right? At least one of them has to be, but this is not the one. A lot of times people see this and they mistakenly write their answer, oh, one answer is 3, one answer is 5, one's that. No. 3 can never be 0. So it just means, oh, that's not the one. Here, I solve this linear equation again. I want to get that m by itself. So m is 5. Or, getting this one by itself to solve it, m is negative 2. Not 3. Right? It's not one of our choices. Another key is I'm going to have two answers. Right? Here's my two answers. Okay, this one's already set equal to 0 for us. Yay! Do we know how to factor it? Do you recognize it? It's not a trinomial. It's a binomial. The only way this thing will factor, and there's not a common factor, check that first. The only way this thing will factor is if everything is a square, since this one is. Oh yeah, that's 7 squared, and that's 3 squared. So my factors are, oh, and of course that's x squared. 7x and a 3 in each one. Right, just got to memorize that one. One gets a plus, one gets a minus. Now we got two things multiplied together that equal 0. One of them is 0. Either 7x minus 3 is 0, or 7x plus 3 is 0. Okay, I got a challenge for you. Can you just write what x equals? Did you get 3/7 and negative 3/7? Can you see that? Because your step is, oh, I'm going to move that 3 over and divide by 7, right? So add 3. We do this so often that it's really nice to just be able to, after we get our factors, understand what our answer is. Okay, so let's see why it was that if we don't see it. And then we're going to divide by 7, right? So over here I would subtract 3. And then divide by 7. Okay, so if you're ready, let's also start working on that. Okay, be careful, they're trying to be tricky. It's got to equal 0, right? X squared minus 3x equals 0. How does this factor? The only thing I can do with that is our first step, we don't ever want to forget, is greatest common factor. Okay, this won't factor anymore. Linear, linear. So either x is 0 or x minus 3 is 0. So x is 0, that's already solved. And then this one would be x is, right, 3. Okay, got to be 0. Doesn't matter if they've already got some stuff factored. That doesn't help us actually. It just gives us extra work. because I got to multiply that out, move the 2 over, and refactor it. Okay, so let's multiply this because it's got to be equal 0. And if we just move the 2 over, let's say, well, why are you multiplying that out? That part's already factored. But if I just move the 2 over, look, it's not factored. I've got this minus 2. Everything doesn't have a multiplication between it. So 4x squared plus 7x minus 2 equals 0. Okay, now this time I don't get my shortcut because the leading coefficient isn't 1. So I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply and give -8, -2 times 4, and add to give 7. So the numbers are still easy to find, right? 8 and -1. But I can't just put them in my factors. And I'm going to put the minus here. Some of you may want the 8 with the 4, but I want the minus here. So minus 1x plus 8x minus 2 equals 0. Write it either way. The only thing that'll factor out of these are an x. That leaves 4x minus 1. Here, now I got a plus sign, so no worries. Factor out that 2. That's 4x minus 1. Now we have a 4x minus 1 in common. And that leaves an x plus 2. So I know that either 4x minus 1 equals 0 or x plus 2 equals 0. Now, can you just write your answers? Can you tell that x equals 1/4? You got it. Or x equals -2. Okay. If you need to do your other steps, do them. Okay. It's not 0. Whoops, need a pen. X squared plus 16x plus 64 equals 0. Can we see that without having to write it? Okay. Now, I could do this thing normally because the leading coefficient is 1. Recognizing that this is a perfect square trinomial, doesn't help me a lot. 2 numbers that multiply to give 64 and add to give 16 or 8. So when that leading coefficient is a 1, it doesn't really matter. But this is a perfect square trinomial, right? This is all squared. This is all squared. This is 2 times 8x. Okay. All right. So since we have these 2 things multiplied together that equals 0, means one of them equals 0. So either x is -8 or x is -8. All right. Yes, they're the same number, but notice there's 2 of them. So I still got my 2 answers, but they can be the same number, but I will have 2 of them. Now when you're writing it, I don't have to write my answer is -8 and my other answer is -8. When we're in college algebra, we'll see the effects of this on the graph and what this means. But if all we're doing is giving a numerical answer, once I say the answer is -8, I don't have to say, oh yeah, and it's also -8, right? But I do want to note there are 2 of them. Okay, this is just going to say that we can use this same idea with some other higher degree polynomials that are not quadratic. But it doesn't matter. Eventually we're going to make them quadratic after we factor. So, whoops. Okay, so notice they just put that extra slide in there to say, oh, this isn't really still solving a quadratic. Well, It kind of is. Let's just say solving polynomials by factoring, because it's got to be equal to 0. If your exponent is bigger than 1, it's got to be equal to 0 and you're going to factor. Doesn't really have to be a quadratic. Okay, common factor first. So I can factor out a 2x, and that leaves x squared minus 25. Since that's just a binomial, I got to recognize that it is the difference of squares. So it factors as x plus 5, x minus 5 equals 0. Now I got a whole bunch of things being multiplied together. So that means either 2 is 0, or x is 0, or x plus 5 is 0, or x minus 5 is 0. But remember, 2 is not 0, so that's not part of the answer. Now, x could be 0, or to make this one 0, x could be negative 5, or to make this one 0, x could be positive 5. Notice this time we got 3 answers. If I didn't get 3 answers, I would know something is wrong. I don't want 4 answers. Okay. Now, it's equal 0, and these two things are already multiplied together, right? So really, I've got 2x plus 1 equals 0, or 2x squared plus 7x minus 15 equals 0. This part I can go ahead and solve because it's just a linear equation. This one I'm going to have to factor. So I need two numbers that multiply to give negative 30 and add to give 7. Can you think of what they are? I'm going to give you a minute to try to come up with them. Multiply to give negative 30 and add to give 7. How about negative 3 and positive 10? Okay, if you did, I should have said if you didn't come up with them, pause it until you can. I'm going on. But okay. All right, now we can factor it by grouping, right? Negative 3 times 10 is negative 30. 10 minus 3 is 7. And we can factor by grouping. Take out an x. That leaves 2x minus 3. Plus sign, so no worries, because I wrote it that way on purpose. Okay, take out a 5, and that leaves 2x minus 3. So take out the 2x minus 3, and that leaves x plus 5 equals 0. So either 2x minus 3 equals 0, or x plus 5 equals 0. So can you tell what your other answers are? X equals 3 over 2, and x equals negative 5. 3 answers again. 1 right here and 2 right here. All right, one more. Ooh. Okay. It's got to equal 0. So this looks pretty nasty, but really they got it all factored up for us. Oh, no they don't, because I'm going to have to move that over. Okay, never mind. It's pretty nasty. Okay, so it can't equal anything other than 0, so I'm going to subtract this whole thing from both sides, right? Whole thing. I'm going to need my room, so I'm getting rid of that. All right, so I wind up with x minus 1 times 2x minus 1 minus x plus 1 squared equals 0. Can't have that. Everything's got to be multiplied together. So I got to multiply all this stuff out and then condense it back down and see if I can refactor it where everything is multiplied. Okay, so let's use our distributive property. So we wind up with 2x squared minus x minus 2x plus 1. Be very, very careful. I got a minus sign there. So I got to leave those parentheses because that minus, exponents first, right? Exponents first in our order of operations. So I got to multiply this out before I put that minus in. Okay, hey, but this is a perfect square trinomial. I know the shortcut for multiplying it out. Look how useful that already is to us. And later it's going to be real useful to not have to have 3 extra steps. Square the first one, this times this. Now multiply them together, this times this, and double it. And then square the last one, or 1 times 1. Now I've got to get rid of those parentheses. So I'm going to distribute that negative. Okay, I'm going to combine like terms. Here's a 2x squared minus x squared. So I wound up with x squared. Here's a minus x minus 2x minus 2x. So that's minus 5x. And here's a plus 1 minus 1. So that's gone. Okay, so factor your x out. That leaves x minus 5 equals 0. So either x is 0 or what? Or x is 5. If you can't go there yet, just keep writing those extra steps. All right, good luck. Have fun.